Hello there, folks. This is Mark Smith with Family Tree Counseling Associates. I'm going to continue my discussion about borderline mothers. The title of this video is Overcoming Denial About Your Borderline Mother. I made a couple of videos last week about my experiences growing up with a borderline mother, and I was really shocked how hard it was for me to make that video. It was easy to talk about the wicked, betraying, disgusting borderline who recently discarded me, but to really name the core of my issue, which was being in the hands of a hurtful, out of control, childish, self-centered borderline mother, there was something in me that was warring against it. It's like the baby, the toddler, the little kid in me still wanted to be in denial about my mother. So I want to systematically chip away at that in me, and I want to chip away at your denial about your narcissistic or borderline parent. Part of how we stay stuck in our recovery from narcissistic abuse, from antisocial personality psychopaths, from narcissists, from covert narcissists, from malignant narcissists, to histrionics, to borderlines, is we focus exclusively on them, like we're the poor innocent victim and we just got duped into this. That is not the truth. Anybody who tells you that is doing you a disservice. You are reenacting your childhood issue. I'm getting passionate about this because it makes me angry to give the cluster B people so much power. They have no power. They have the power we give them. We recruit them to do our work. So I want to help you get you unstuck. I want to get you in recovery for your narcissistic abuse syndrome. You do that in many ways that address your body tissues, that address your trauma, but also get you focused on healing the wounds of your childhood. And I need to continue to unmask and to demyth my particular mother. She wasn't Doris Day. She tried to sell that she was an overweight Doris Day. She wasn't even fun. There's this myth that she was fun. She was the center of attention. She might have been having some fun, but it wasn't fun to be around her. She wasn't even a good cook. She was a good cook with 2 or 3 dishes, but to be a good cook, you gotta cook. And she would have grandiose meals from time to time, but grinding out meals every day, she didn't do. Part of why I think my siblings and I have developed food addictions is there wasn't enough food around. She wouldn't shop enough, and I grew up on scrambled eggs and Kraft macaroni and cheese. Can I get a shout out from people? Remember one time my mom brought home several boxes of cereal and my brother Sam took a couple of them and hid them. That's the kind of environment it was. There wasn't enough food to eat. So my family talking about, and I was doing it in the poem last week, what a loving, selfless, wonderful cook my mother was. That was bullshit. She was busy out feeding upon narcissistic supply in the community, and she wasn't taking care of her kids. There's also a myth that she was a community leader. She was Virginia Pat, the Democrat. But people that really lead in the community are servants. They're looking out for the public. I don't know what's going to happen in this coming election. I'm not very political. Don't take this as a statement one way or another. But boy, I tell you what, I look at both candidates and I see a great deal of narcissism in both of them. It scares me. I don't know which one's going to win, and I don't have super strong feelings either way. I lean a little bit toward the left, but they both look like scary personalities to me. Let's pray for this country, because it's going to be in the hands of a narcissist. Of course, Sam Acton says it's been in the hands of a narcissist for 8 years. Another myth about my mother is that she's a helper of the poor. She was. And she was, but she didn't have any boundaries. I remember showing up for Thanksgiving dinner in my own home and there being some street person there. And that street person was there to feed my mother's narcissistic supply, and it felt creepy, and it didn't feel like home, and it felt abusive to me and abandoning. It's a myth that my mother was a good mother. She was a bad mother. To me, she was a terrible mother. It was a myth that she was loving. When my mother would touch me, my skin would crawl. And I'm not suggesting that she was sexually abusive. It's just there was a negative charge because she had abandoned me when I was so little. And I knew that any efforts to show love were more for her than they were for me. The reason I'm breaking this down isn't to disparage the memory of my mother. Y'all need to do this too. Sit down with a piece of paper and write down the myths about what everybody thought your dad was or your mom was, and then make another list and say who they really were. My mother was selfish. She was a rager. She was physically abusive. She was a thief. She was a bully. She was a liar. Lie, 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 lie. She was vicious. She was a manipulator. She was a user. She was a cheater. She was scary. She was a backstabber. She was just so unstable. And I hate saying these things about my mother, but that's what set me up for a life of disconnection. I was blessed to have a 27-year marriage with a wonderful woman, but a woman that really didn't fit my type, who there was a lack of real intense chemistry, which led to a midlife disconnection, and there was just something missing. And then I spent 6.5 years with a complete con artist counterfeit, and I didn't know the difference. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know. When you have a counterfeit mother or a counterfeit father, you'll grow up and have counterfeit spouses. Just that sentence right there is worth a lot of money. If you have a counterfeit mother who's pretending to be friggin' Doris Day, who's pretending to be a great cook and a loving mother and a hero in the community, if you have a dad who's pretending to be Father of the Year, who's pretending to help people, who's pretending to be a giver in the community and a good husband, but he's really a monster, you're going to grow up and marry monsters. So I want to tell some stories about the truth. And again, I don't say these stories to gain sympathy. I don't say them to disparage her. I want you to write down your own stories of what happened to you and be keenly aware of it. When I was in the 7th grade, This is embarrassing. I came down with a condition called trench mouth, and I don't remember exactly what it was. I just knew my gums were all swollen and I had really bad breath and I was in the hospital. And during that time, a amateur photographer who had come to take photos of my family had fallen in narcissistic supply with my borderline mother, and this guy was a psychopath. And he had 3 children, George, Dennis, and Teresa. And they were the red-headed stepchildren. There were 6 of us, Smiths, and there were 3 stepchildren. And they had to do the dishes. And they were kids, and they weren't supervised, and sometimes they would take dirty dishes and stick them away, or they'd just do a bad job, and we developed a horrible problem with cockroaches that just infested the kitchen and infested the house. And one of the banes and most painful things of my childhood was all the cockroaches. So one day my mother and George, the stepfather, they took dirty pans and they tied them around George and Dennis. And they had to walk around all day with dirty pans tied around their neck. Another thing that struck me, my mother was a really overweight woman, but she had no sense of personal boundaries. I've raised 3 wonderful children, ages 25, 23, and soon to be 21, and I don't believe they've seen me naked much, maybe if they burst into a room without knocking, but I never placed myself in a situation, and neither did their mother. So it was never, but growing up, I saw my mother naked all the time. It was so grotesque and it was so uncomfortable. And as I look back upon it, it was a boundary violation. She had no boundaries, and it just makes me want to throw up to think how many times she would disrobe in front of her teenage boys, and there was something sick about it. It was just weird, and I just recognized that it was harmful to me. One of the worst things that ever happened to me was on the last day of the 8th grade. It was June the 6th, a Friday, of 1973, and everybody loaded on a bus from Sycamore Middle School in Kokomo, Indiana. We went to Turkey Run State Park, and while playing down by the river, a young man named John Sullivan fell in the water and he drowned. And there were rumors that me, Charlie Brown, one of the nicest, sweetest fellows and shyest fellows in the school, was a leader of a gang, and that I'd deliberately killed this boy. And there was an inquiry by the police where I had to go and talk to the police and the judge and see what happened. It was just the most shaming, between acne, poverty, free lunches, cockroaches, and Turkey Run, and of course the crib death of my sister. These were some of the horrific nightmares of my childhood. Anyway, I grew up on basketball courts, playing ball with my many black friends. I love black people, and I often say I aspire to be a black person. I haven't pulled it off yet, but I'm working on it. And the way I shook hands, I would shake hands, sort of like this, That's how we shook hands on the basketball court. And in interacting with lawyers and police and school officials, somebody would walk up, I'd shake hands like that. And I remember my mother, after this was over, with this derisive, devaluing tone and facial expressions that only borderlines can manufacture, she mocked me for not shaking hands like a white guy. But I didn't really have a father. I didn't really have a role model. I was shaking hands the only way I knew how to shake hands. But I can't put into words. There it was, one of the most embarrassing, scary, horrific days of my life. And to have my mother humiliate me over how I shook hands, it stung me. And that's what happens when you grow up with cluster Bs. Your sweet, innocent spirit gets constantly stung. When I was 13, my mother sat me down and she told me the story that her father really wasn't her father, that my grandmother, who grew up in an orphanage and who was very, very vulnerable, was taken advantage of by an adult man who she was the nanny of the family, and it produced my mother. And off my mother went for 3 years to an orphanage. So there was 2 generations of children sent off to orphanages. My grandmother went to an orphanage because of the bipolar disease that runs through the females through 4 or 5 generations in my family. So my mom told me this, and she was crying like a little baby. And the rescuer, the therapist in me as a 13-year-old, the parentified kid who took care of my siblings, I gave my mother, who never attached to me and was really my mother, I said, I'll take care of you, Mom. I'll protect you. I'll provide for you. And she cried. And it was the beginning of my career as a therapist, I think, and as a rescuer of borderline women. And it was just so wrong for her to dump her. Instead of going and seeing therapists and getting better, she sucked dry the sweetheart and the good intentions and the unresolved rescuing of her second child, her son. In the summer of 1978, I had just finished the best year of my life at Taylor University, my freshman year, and I had so many friends, and I was high on Jesus, and it was an addiction, but it was a good addiction. And I loved Taylor University. And then I got a call from my mother crying and talking about what she was going through, and she didn't have money, and there were troubles with my siblings. So I made a commitment to quit Taylor University, to work as much as I can, and I tried to fix the bathroom because the shower area was all decayed and needed replaced. I took every penny I made and I bought tiles. I had no training, and I tried to install them, and they were crooked. It was better than what they had. They had new tile and a remodeled bathroom, but it looked like, somebody with no skills had done the work, as was the case. But by the end of the summer, I was depressed. I had lost my sense of self. My faith was wavering. I felt invisible. I was an extension of my mother. And I started to get ulcers. And at the last minute, I was able to squeeze my way back into school. I went with no money. I went with no new clothes. I went with my stomach being eaten up, and I had to stay in a crappy house. And I got to school just basically having suffered narcissistic abuse all summer. But I dodged a bullet there and was able to move on with my life. And that spring I met my future wife and, the mother of my children. I tell these stories because I want you guys to tell your own stories to each other, and more importantly, to own your own stories for yourself. Many times when we go through these things, we think they're normal. That's all we've ever known. We think they're normal. Sometimes we even laugh about them, and there's nothing funny about any of these stories. These are all stories of a young man being used, a young man being turned into an extension of a manipulative cluster B. Good therapy is about truth. And the more truth you can learn about yourself, the better. The more truth you can learn about your parents, the better. When my clients come in, I tell them, I'm not going to try to save your marriage. I don't believe in marriage counseling. This experience is about learning who you are and where you came from, and it's finding out what's true. I'm going to gather up as much truth about you, and we're going to have us a come to Jesus feedback session, and you're either going to get it or I'm going to chase you out of the building, and I really don't care which. I tell them I can use the scalpel or I can go out back and get the jackhammer, but we're going to get down to business and find out what's true about you, and you'll either stand it or you'll hate me. In the Bible it says, do not strongly rebuke a mocker lest they hate you. So when people come to therapy, they either get their hearts opened up and they register with insights and epiphanies that are true, or they hate me, and I don't care which. So your narcissistic abuse syndrome is all about your childhood abuse and abandonment. Don't let anybody tell you different. I'll get comments of people objecting to this, but they don't know what they're talking about. You cannot have a healthy childhood and grow up and pick a psychopath. It's never happened in the history of mankind. Take that to the bank. I'm telling you the truth. Unfortunately, the way Mother Nature designed healing is, however we're wounded as children, we're going to reenact it. It's a sucky system. A woman who sees her father beat her mother, who does she marry? She marries a man who seems like a sweetheart, and she finds out some point in the marriage that he's a batterer and an abuser. A woman who's sexually abused, who does she marry? She might marry a preacher and find out that he's a sex addict who's molesting the children. And if you grow up with a borderline mother, you're going to have a strong attraction to cluster Bs. So I want to give you some assigned reading to learn about this You Marry Your Issue business. Those of you who've been following my work know that I'm a big believer in a book called Getting the Love You Want by Harville Hendrix, Hendrix with an X in Hendrix. He's the founder of Imago Therapy, and it's basically what I'm telling you. You pick who you need to pick. There are no victims in marriage, and these awful people are just tools in Mother Nature's plan to heal you so that you can be blessed and healed and move on with your life. That's the truth. So make a list of the myths about who your parents were, the myths that you might still believe. Make a list of who they really are, and then make a list of the people you've been involved with in your relationships. That's too much blue going on in the background. make a list of the characteristics of your husband or your wife or your girlfriend or a series of cluster B people. It's the same list. You don't grow up with apple pie and sweetie pies and the Waltons and Mary Frankenstein. It just doesn't happen. So, Getting the Love You Want by Harville Hendrix will teach you the mysteries of love, the mysteries of marriage, and the healing components of marital pain and marital combat. It was a little easier talking about the truth about my borderline mother this week. I'm going to make some further videos about cluster B parents. Perhaps I have some things to say about my dear father. Thank you for watching the video today. It's a beautiful Sunday. I'm going to a reenactment of a wedding with a good friend of mine who's done some healing in midlife. If you haven't joined our YouTube channel, I want to encourage you to do that. Family Tree Counseling on YouTube. We're getting up to about 13,500, and we want to get as many people as possible learning these truths that are healing. The truth will set you free. That's why I'm such a component, such a champion for people learning the truth about themselves, even if it hurts. It'll set you free. Also, I've got some good books at familytreecounseling.com, ebooks that you can read that'll add to your attack on your denial system and get you working on your recovery from the wounds of your family of origin. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your support, my friends. I love you guys. Have a wonderful week. God bless you. Bye-bye.